Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today I have a really fun dyeing project prepared for all of you. Today's video is sponsored by Kelly Vaughn of the KnitSwag Etsy shop. Kelly is a knitter and a graphic designer, and so her designs really combine these two artistic crafts to create some really stunning pieces of knit swag that are clearly designed by someone who understands what knit stitches look like. The KnitSwag Etsy shop features mugs with knit designs and other things that a knitter would appreciate. You can even get customized mugs with your name included in the knitting, like the one that Kelly sent me here. Two of my favorite designs are the sunflower clock and then the crocus mug. I love looking at the way that the stitches look together. It has a knit, a little embroidered feel to it, and it's just really beautiful graphic design work. If you'd like to learn more about the KnitSwag Etsy shop, you can find a link in the video description. And Kelly has generously given me a coupon code to share with all of you. Use the code ChemKnits15 to save 15% off in the KnitSwag Etsy shop over the next few weeks. For full details on the coupon code and the dates that you can use it, you can find all of the details in the video description. Thank you, Kelly from KnitSwag, for sponsoring this video. So let's start thinking about the yarn. I want to dye something inspired by this mug today. The colors happen to be some of my favorite. If you look at my own ChemKnits logo and look at the mug, you'll see something that pairs together really, really nicely. But I thought that since the colors excite me, I actually want to revisit a classic ChemKnits video, but with a twist. We're gonna try an old technique on a couple different yarn bases and see what we can see. Today I want to revisit one of my favorite yarn dyeing videos ever that actually isn't even part of Dyepot Weekly. It's something that I did a long, long time ago. And I want to hand paint some speckles using Wilton's Violet food coloring. Now, to dye yarn with food coloring, it needs to be a protein-based yarn. So wool, alpaca, silk, and well, we have all three of those fibers here today. Today we're gonna dye 100 grams of KnitPicks Switch DK, which is 100% Superwash Merino. But we're also going to dye some Diadem fingering yarn in the colorway Pearl. Now this yarn has a little bit of almost a lavender cast to it already. This yarn is fingering weight, it is single ply, it is 50% alpaca, 50% silk. I expect that we will probably see some pretty different results on the two colorways, but I'm really excited to give this a shot and see what we can see. I'll have to check my stash. I might actually have the original yarn that is my inspiration for today, but by using a little paintbrush and some of the paste that is still fairly concentrated, we can add little dots by hand onto our yarn, and because of just the way that colors wick through the yarn, some of the pinks will probably strike quickly and the blues will spread a little more. At least that's what we'll probably see on the Switch DK, and we'll get some really beautiful results. Just on twisting it, I can already tell that I'm going to want to be really careful with this Diadem yarn. Ooh, it is beautiful, but we will be hand painting on the counter and then steaming the yarn after that. I'm debating and going a little bit back and forth between whether or not I want to put down some plastic wrap to wrap it up, but I think that I'm not going to, because it's okay if some colors spread a little bit from where the yarn touches itself. In our pre-soak, we have some plain tap water and a nice splash of white vinegar. There's already a little bit of vinegar in there before, but I wanted a little bit more because sometimes well, not sometimes, but alpaca and silk typically requires a bit more acid than, say, wool. Now, normally I would also want to soak our silk yarn a bit longer. I'm planning to soak for about 30 minutes. Since what we're doing is fairly surface level versus trying to get color all the way through, it's more of a large sort of speckle splotched colorway. It's okay if the strands are not completely wet. I do want to take really, really careful care on that diadem yarn. And yeah, I'm gonna leave this to soak for the next 30 minutes. In the end, I did decide to add a layer of some cling wrap onto my work surface so that way I can wrap everything up. This would allow me to, say, microwave the yarn. I'm happy to be using some of my dedicated dye equipment, so I'll be steaming it in a steamer basket, but in theory you could microwave this like I did with the original. But the main reason for the plastic wrap today is just the ease of the cleanup. It means that even with my work surface protected, I'll need to do less cleaning of it, so that way I can convert my space back into a kitchen. And the reality of filming videos with my kids home means that I am adapting some of my techniques so that way I can still create fun colors. I'm planning on using 2 little paint brushes today to apply these speckles by hand. But you could use the prongs of a fork. I probably wouldn't use a plastic fork just because they might have some more rough edges that could snag the yarn. But you could use a fork, you could use the end of a spoon. Anything that has like a thin surface will help. Well, we're gonna see spread on the yarn, but that's why I'm picking something really, really small to work with. Wilton's Violet food coloring is really fun. The gel paste from this container is actually thick enough that with, I think, this exact brush, I was able to, and no other thickener, put on like a thick R at one point onto a project. But I'm just trying to get, oh God, this is so messy, a nice, there we go, glob of our food coloring. Maybe I won't be using that particular brush now. With a little bit of water right there, just sort of cleaning up the edge a bit. I might come and dip onto that edge again, or maybe I'll just wipe it off. I gently squeezed out the yarn from our dye bath, taking extra care with this diadem yarn, and I will be moving things around because I'm going to want to cover as much of the surface as possible. And with our little palette, I do want to add some water to it to make it a little more paint-like, a little less thick, but this is basically what I'll be doing. I'm going to zoom you in a second, so that way you can get a better look at these speckles. So I would say right away, I'm not seeing a ton of spread on either. And I'm just going through and tapping at the yarn. It's looking fairly blue for starting. And actually over here I'm starting to see, oh, which of course you can't see, on the diadem yarn, I am starting to see some spread. I'm starting to see it break apart a little bit into a purple with a blue halo. I'm watching to see if I will see that on our Swish DK yarn as well. It might take a little longer, or if the yarn is a little bit too, or the dye is a little bit too concentrated, it might not spread as much. I think one of the original times I did this, I did add more liquid in when I was adding these specks. But let me take the camera off the tripod and move you in even closer. Here you go. In just a minute, you can see that beauty of the colors breaking on our Alpaca silk blend. I expect things might spread out even more, but we'll see what happens. On the Swish, I'm actually seeing a bit of a pink spread, which is a little surprising. This kind of spread is what I was expecting more of, watching the blue spread. But, you know, sometimes things surprise you a little bit. Oh, goodness. Every once in a while I do get a pink spread with the Wilton's Violet, and that's not something I can explain completely. But we will carry on and see what happens. I put on a podcast and zened out as I added more and more of these polka dots to our yarn. Attempting for something fairly random, but also trying to make sure that I have color going through all the strands. If you wanted to, you could paint these really thin stripes across all of the strands, and that would allow you to make sure that yes, you're going to have some color on every round. But the risk you run into with doing that is you could end up with more pooling of the speckles. And so by doing something that is a little more truly, quote, random, you will get a more random distribution when you finally knit up with the yarn. Certainly this project, and from what we saw in the very first few minutes, is going to show how things are going to look different on different fiber types. I did not go rewatch my original video before doing this, which honestly could have been a mistake. That first video was done on Stroll, and maybe in the future I'll go back and recreate. But I sort of wanted to go for it, and honestly, I'm really excited that the initial results are really different on the different fiber types. I think that that is so fun. We'll obviously take closer looks as we get towards the end of the process, but I think that this is a good example of how even for me, with something that I have done before many times, things can still be surprising. I'm now actually thinking that the reason why I might not be seeing the pink to blue spread I was expecting on the Swish DK might be because there could have been a little too much acid in that Presoak. And so that could be why it's behaving a little differently. So if I'm going to repeat this, maybe I would stick to, say, 2 to 3 tablespoons of vinegar in that bath, something that is a little more, quote, typical for me, and then we might see something that is a little closer to what I expect. Nevertheless, I did move the yarn around during this process so that way I could try to get full coverage. And I did make sure to check at the ends near where these reusable zip ties are to make sure that there was good coverage in there around the tie as well. It is okay if there's longer blank patches with this kind of colorway, but I did want to try to create something that had, I mean, I guess it's light speckles still, but I wanted them to be still fairly like heavy. So maybe medium speckles is better than saying light speckles. All right, well, I want things to sit before we take a closer look because I want to give it a time to spread, but I'm going to do a final look. Okay, it feels fairly good. I can't help myself though. It's hard to stop because as you move it, your little like splotches, when the strands move a little bit, it makes colors that seemed a little more intense to be a little more spread out. All right, let's see. Yeah, this one's looking pretty good. There's actually not very much color on the plastic wrap. It is staying in the yarn really well, probably because I'm not adding a lot of liquid. So that sort of removed that concern. I will say the speckles on here are no question smaller than what I did in the original video. I think the amount of vinegar has a lot to do with it. Some of the early splotches over here, well, let me come zoom you in. So some on our Alpaca silk blend, some of those splotches are just separating completely into pink and blue. Whereas these hand-painted speckles on the Swish are more intact. And if I still have that other skein around, I will pull that out. I'll be linking to the original video in the video description so you can go see the actual conditions for optimal things, but it's cool, I think, on the diadem to see the like big spread versus the more recent ones that I added. It's okay if there's different like kinds of specks on the yarn, but I do feel a lot more consistency in our Swish right now. I do want to let the yarn sit a little bit before we go steam it. I'm not wrapping it up super carefully, but again, this was more to make things easier. With the limited amount of transfer of these colors onto the plastic wrap, I don't think that you need to use plastic wrap for it. But I do want to go ahead and let this sit for 10 minutes before I go into the steamer basket just to give things time to separate. If I started applying heat right now, then we might set things more as they are, and I like the spread. Without a doubt, we have some dye left behind. I am just gonna pour that water on to let things soak. When I go and I wash my brushes, I will be saving this food coloring and we'll be using it, I think, in a leave no dye behind video. Because honestly, I can't bear to throw the food coloring away. 8 minutes in, Houston, we have a problem. There must be a hole in the lid. It is leaking out. And our yarn is right here. Shoot. Shoot, shoot, shoot. Shoot. Okay, how is our yarn? Our yarn might hopefully be okay, but it might be on the outside of the plastic. I'm gonna go put this in the steamer basket right now. But you know, when I was like, oh, I don't want to leave any dye behind. I want to save everything I can. Well, man, thankfully I think the yarn itself will be okay, but sometimes I make mistakes. I make boo-boos. And I make messes that we have to clean up. But at least you can see some really, really beautiful Wilton's Violet breaking right here. Found the culprit. There's a tiny little hole right here. Darn! Wilton's Violet can stain, and well, I will try. Sometimes spraying with Lysol can help get it off, but otherwise, I mean, this drop cloth is pretty stained anyway, so that's why we have a drop cloth, because it keeps the counter safe. Anyway, the yarn is in our steamer basket, and hopefully that spill won't cause too big of a problem. I let the yarn cool, and this is what I see at the bottom. Oh man, we did get some leakage, some pink leakage. But hopefully it's not so bad. It could have been a lot worse. Could have been a lot worse. Yeah, so we've got some bits of pink. And you know, it's funny, there's some spots where I see a little bit of the blue halo I expected, but yeah, I mean, this is what I was expecting on the other one. I think my vinegar concentration may have been too high, but that's something that maybe I could try controlling more for at some point. But either way, all of these colors are beautiful. Now I am going to carefully wash. I'm going to use a tiny bit, like a pea-sized amount of some dish soap. I'm not expecting to see any bleeding. Ultimately, there's not a ton of dye, but I think the yarn is beautiful. Kelly, I hope that you're really, really gonna like the yarn. I'm trying to be as careful as possible. I'm gonna do one more very careful final rinse, then we're gonna put Kelly's yarn through the spin dryer and hang it up to dry. I don't think I exactly achieved that colorway that I was going for today. The colorway on the Diadem yarn is closer. You see the breaking of the Wilton's Violet into that magenta and blue, but we're not seeing that purple average, and that purple is still very much present on our Swish DK sock yarn. My hypothesis, which I've mentioned earlier, is that I had too much vinegar in the pre-soak. I have seen Wilton's Violet have a pale pink sort of halo in sometimes, and I haven't really been able to explain it. And my only real thought is that there's just a lot of vinegar in there, so that way things weren't breaking in the way that I'm really used to. Nevertheless, these speckles are gorgeous. I just realized that this Diadem yarn is no longer available on the KnitPicks website, which has me bummed because it is luminous, soft, and beautiful, and I'd really like to dye more of it. Even if Kelly's yarn didn't turn out exactly how I had envisioned, I do think that I did create a colorway that complemented the mug that Kelly from KnitSwag designed for me. Kelly Vaughn from KnitSwag, thank you so much for sponsoring today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. Please go check out her Etsy shop to see how you can get your own custom knit mug and some of her other beautiful knitting themed designs. In addition to knit swag like mugs and other home accessories, you can also get some knitting graph paper from Kelly where you can create your own charts that will actually look like the knit stitches, and that can really help you when it comes to designing your own colorwork pattern. KnitSwag has given me a coupon code to share with all of you. Use the code ChemKnits15 to save 15% off in the KnitSwag Etsy shop. Full details and dates for this offer will be below on the screen and down in the video description. Once again, Kelly and KnitSwag, thank you so much for sponsoring today's video. As for the grand oops, where some of that color spilled, I am so thankful that the only remnant is a little bit of some extra pink throughout the yarn. I think that the consequence is fairly minor, but leave this as a lesson to all of you that maybe when you have something wrapped up, set it aside where things can't spill as much. I really like the way that these colorways turned out, even if it's not exactly what I expected. But the colors do complement my new mug really, really well. I found my color inspiration for today's video. It just happens to be at the end of the video. Maybe it would have been helpful for me to actually have pulled this out and, again, rewatch that video. But even though the speckles we got are a little more blown out or a little sharper and unbroken today, we still did something very, very similar. I just know that I am going to want to try again to recreate this colorway. Today we learned that different fiber types of yarn will respond to breaking colors differently, especially if we have a lot of an unspecified volume of acid, unfortunately for that one. If you want to dye yarn with food coloring, you need to make sure that you're using a protein-based yarn. As awesome as Breaking Violet is, it won't work on cotton or acrylic-based yarn. But you can definitely give it a shot on some wool acrylic or wool cotton blends, and please share the results with me. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I like to both film things as I try it for the first time, and sometimes I try to replicate things, and I mean, it works better when I actually look at the conditions that I used. But either way, we did certainly demonstrate how one technique can look extremely different on two different yarn bases. Having something silk alpaca versus superwash merino can make a big, big difference with the way the colors strike, the size of these speckles. I don't think I even mentioned that the speckles are much sharper and smaller on our wool yarn. If you love the content that I'm producing here on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel, please go and check out the ChemKnits Patreon. You can get early access to a new video each month, some behind the scenes sneak peeks, and more. I'll have a link to that in the video description and iCard. Are there any videos that you really want to see me recreate, give another shot at, whether I'm following my own instructions or not? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.